welcome back to North American Blockchain Summit. Frank Kushner, Mark Hopkins, and we have Mike Alfred, a distinguished figure in the cryptocurrency blockchain world. Mike, professional background, entrepreneurial, founding CEO, executive board member, advisor, value-oriented investor. He was CEO of Digital Assets Data. Welcome to the show. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be in Texas. Yeah. It's a fun day.
So you heard everybody here. You heard Vivek. Everyone's talking about Chokepoint, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on what Vivek has said, and if you think there's going to be anything that RFK is going to say any different.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an expert on regulation and like what the government's going to do. I think there are a lot of people in Bitcoin and crypto in particular that like want to believe there's some vast conspiracy to like take down the industry. I think a lot of that is narrative because it's more fun to believe that like the whole world's out to get you than to think nobody cares at all.
Right.
So I don't think there's any sort of vast conspiracy. I think there's a lot of ignorance. There's a lot of people who misunderstand Bitcoin and crypto. There are a lot of people in government that don't have time to understand. I think a lot of that sort of works itself out over time as people realize the societal value to these technologies. So I'm not personally that worried about Chokepoint. I think it may be a short-term issue more than a long-term issue.
Yeah, a big part of my contention is that like there has to be some sort of either regulation or capture that we can actually foundationally adhere to and then grow from. And I feel like we haven't had that. There's so many people that talk about what they think crypto is, and no one seems to, as you said, have the time to actually look into what it is. So for me, that question really means, how do you see a way forward without any particular regulation, regardless of it's blue or red? It seems to be that crypto advocates really just believe that DeFi is the best path, and I think you kind of believe something similar.
Yeah, I mean, look, decentralized platforms are a real innovation, and they allow for organization of people and processes that are different than anything before. And I think that should be celebrated, and I think it should be allowed to flourish. If you try to kill it, it'll just go somewhere else.
Yeah,
that's the power. The China tried to shut down Bitcoin mining, and all those miners ended up in like the U.S. and Kazakhstan. And if you try to stop DeFi protocols from operating in the U.S., they'll just move to Singapore or Dubai or Malta. And so I think there's a real risk that you over-regulate. At the same time, you've got to protect end consumers who are buying a lot of these things and ideas at a nascent stage when they really look a lot like untested securities.
Mm-hmm.
So I can kind of see it both ways.
Right.
I sort of have more of a balanced view, and I don't think that all crypto is necessarily amazing, and that all securities-like activity should be unregulated.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I don't want to see the entire industry move to Dubai. I think that would be quite bad for the U.S. It would be like letting China own AI instead of trying to be a world leader at it.
It's also somewhat counterintuitive to the law enforcement goals, right? If you move it out of U.S. jurisdiction, you're going to lose any ability to cooperate with the companies that you're trying to investigate.
That's right, and Bitcoin is a ledger that's completely transparent, and so law enforcement's actually figured out that they prefer for criminals to use Bitcoin than dollars, because a lot more criminal activity is conducted with dollars, not just on an absolute basis, but also sort of on a relative basis. Like there really isn't that much criminal activity happening on Bitcoin, because the reality is it's much easier to catch people who use Bitcoin because every transaction can be viewed.
Right.
So the other side of this is the banking industry and like the banking lobby. Like I understand why banks are nervous about these technologies, and in particular Bitcoin, because we're going into a time where the government's running huge deficits. The Fed and Treasury are ultimately going to ask the commercial banks to kind of share in this burden if we continue on the path we're going down. And Bitcoin represents an avenue, an escape vector for end retail consumers who no longer trust that their money's safe in a bank, or they don't feel the interest justifies the risk. And so you could view Bitcoin as a way for people to get away from the existing system, and it may increase the bank's cost of capital. Like they would love to have cheap deposits forever,
right?
And that era may be over, and Bitcoin kind of accelerates that process. So I understand why certain components of the traditional financial system would like to attack Bitcoin. It's just, candidly, it's not going to work
Yeah,
because you can't stop it.
yeah, you can, and you're seeing every day, another South American country that basically moves over to the cryptocurrency side of the equation because it's still better than the crazy inflation that they're having. Now, speaking of interesting, mispriced assets, talk to me a little bit about the actual book value of some of these public miners, private miners, these different actions that are out there.
Yeah, so it's a very interesting environment. The hash price was really low for a long time, but the hash rate, the global hash rate's been going higher. Particularly the public miners continue to invest billions of dollars in new capex, building new facilities, buying machines, building substations, securing low-cost power in rural areas like West Texas, for example. And so it's been a really odd year because Bitcoin's more than doubled. And earlier in the year, the miners looked like they were really participating, but basically since July, they've kind of been in the toilet. Yeah. And my suspicion is just that we're in a period of pretty intensely negative sentiment that doesn't really reflect the kind of 12 to 24 month opportunity to own these businesses that are essentially levered operationally to the price of Bitcoin. So the world's sort of imagining a continued $35,000 or $36,000 Bitcoin, which, by the way, is way better than 26
Right.
a half ago. But it's still not enough for some of the miners. And, with the halving coming, that acts as a pretty restrictive force, right? Because your cost double in that period. And so I think it could be a tough time for certain miners, but I don't think the market's really capable of parsing that. And so basically the market's throwing out all the companies, even though some of them are going to do quite well post-halving.
If they can hold on,
They can survive.
if they can survive, they can hold on.
Survival right now.
Yeah.
So you had at one point predicted $1 million Bitcoin. Is that still kind of a thing that, and under the next 10 years, right? So is that still kind of a realistic prediction in your mind?
Yeah, I think 2032, 2033 time frame. We still don't know what's going to happen in 25. 24, 25 should be pretty good from a seasonality, liquidity, traditional halving cycle dynamics. So let's say we see 100 or 150 or 200 this cycle, then you should see 400, 500, 600 by sort of 2029.
Nice, right.
And then, I'm not the only one. Kathy Wood and others have all sort of predicted similar numbers in the similar time frame. But the problem with Bitcoin is it's so reflexive that if it goes to 200 this cycle, it very well could go to 300.
Yeah.
Right? If it goes to 300, it could go to 350. And it seems unlikely today as we sit here because we're all anchored to 20, 30K Bitcoin prices. But have this conversation in 25 or have this conversation in 28 or 29. I'm telling you, everybody's model's moving to the right.
Yeah, well, take a look at the treasury, right? Like a 50 basis point move.
Yeah.
10 year. Things can't happen like that. It can't overrun that high. Well, we'll see.
Yeah, and a lot of people will be caught flat-footed, especially with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has scarcity built in to the protocol at its very core. And in a world of abundantly cheap debt for the last 5-10 years, zero interest rates, stimulus, fiscal deficits, Bitcoin is a scarce, definably scarce asset in a world full of funny money, essentially.
Yeah.
So there's really no limit to what Bitcoin could do as expressed in dollar terms.
Yeah. I mean, everything is aligned in that direction. I have there's the normies of my life, and then there's the people that are on our side of the fence where you've expressed $1 million Bitcoin doesn't sound controversial to me.
Yeah.
But you talk about this during the middle of the SBF trial, and they're like, "Oh no, it's gonna be $2,000." I'm like, "What are you talking about?"
Right.
I don't even understand how you could think that, But it's a different world it's shrinking. I think their side is. I mean, the knowledge is expanding that Bitcoin is scarce and that mining isn't going away, and the mechanics behind it are not changing, at least not in a negative way.
I think Bitcoin really entered the public consciousness in a serious way in 2017.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving, everyone was talking about Bitcoin around the Thanksgiving table, and there was a mania. The thing is that the average person, they've heard the word Bitcoin for the first time, but they still, even today, don't understand why it matters. So there's still this big delta between brand awareness, name recognition, and actual understanding.
Right.
That's really the opportunity with the space. As it relates to consensus expectations, as we know from traditional markets, they're always moving. The market's often very wrong. And so you ask, even just like a month and a half ago, I was sitting at the Swan mining day at a panel, and I said to the room, I said, I think you're all too bearish. I wouldn't be surprised to see 35 to 40K Bitcoin by the end of the year. And that was highly controversial.
Oh, I bet.
40 days ago.
Yeah.
On a panel with
45
Swan
days ago.
Bitcoin, so that crowd,
At a mining event with
Yeah.
a bunch of really talented executives who know Bitcoin
Yeah.
and, thought leaders and influencers. And that's the thing about market expectations, right? When they move, everybody gets moved to the right or left, and that can change with Bitcoin literally in a month.
yeah. So one of the things our network is focused on is education. And so we're always, particularly in the world of blockchain and crypto and Bitcoin, we're struggling with how to correctly educate the right audience. And to the normies, what level of education do you think it's appropriate to kind of delve into when you're trying to introduce them to Bitcoin for them to properly, grok, like being able to look at it in the future, go, okay, it's going to be $1 million Bitcoin is a reasonable estimation. How do you get from, I've heard the word Bitcoin, to I understand why that's not a controversial thing to say?
It's an iterative journey. So
Okay.
people who are good open source learners, people who play music and they like to improvise more than they like sheet music, tend to do better.
Right.
Because there's so much information. I'm not going to suggest one specific book or one specific
Sure.
course, but I think it's important to start with what is money? The fundamental question of what is a dollar? Because we all, growing up, with before Bitcoin, I think a lot of people just assume that the current reality has always been the reality, and they don't know about 1971. They don't know about the gold standard. They don't know about previous iterations of money, fiat currencies going back to the Roman Empire. And I think starting with a study of what is money used for, what are the characteristics that make good money, you can just do an objective evaluation of all the forms of money that you interact with and something like Bitcoin. And I think once you do that work, all gets easier from there. But exactly how to do that, I'm not the expert in that, because I like to go deep and then come back out, and then go deep and explore listen to podcasts, read books, do stuff online. And then before I knew it, I became one of the people that I was reading stuff from on Twitter. That happened sort of accidentally. I never intended on being a Twitter persona at all, but I enjoy interacting with the Bitcoin community, and that's kind of my best expression of it.
Well, that's awesome. That is so great. Yeah, I have from a financial planner's point of view, I have so many Fibonacci-like similarities that I have clients now that, didn't know or care anything about gold, physical or otherwise. And now, because of the way the market is and how scared everyone is, everything, they're like, well, I want to buy gold. I want to buy gold in my IRA. I want to buy... So what kind of physical gold do you want to buy? Do you know anything about bullion? Do you know anything about which one are you going to buy? And it's similar to kind of a crypto conversation where it's like, okay, so what is the right one, right? And if you take a look at the two majors, for the most part, you can talk about Bitcoin, you can talk about Ethereum, oil versus, I just find it fascinating for the individual investor. What advice would you give someone just starting out that has this question? I want to be involved. How do I do it? Because they can't come to me.
I can condense 5, 6, 7 years of study down to, if you don't want to lose money and you want to increase your purchasing power, own Bitcoin with no counterparty. Period. Just because if you buy Bitcoin, you put it in BlockFi or Celsius or Voyager, or God forbid you give it to Suzu and Kyle at 3 Arrows, or you put it in any of these platforms that ultimately ended up being insolvent, all you owned was a paper claim for Bitcoin. And so if you don't want to do the work to assess the balance sheet of every custodian in the space, but most people don't, you really need to learn how to use cold storage. You need to learn how to use a signing device. You need to learn how to hold your own keys. But Bitcoin's unique in that way, right? You can really hold it, and you can be sure that your holding is not a liability to anyone else if you hold the keys, and it's protected by literally 400 or 500 exahash of power now. These miners globally are decentralized. You can't say the same thing about Ethereum. Ethereum's a proof of stake protocol. The rules could sort of change any time. It's much, much harder to attack Bitcoin. It's much, much harder to change Bitcoin. So when I sell my mom, like, hey, you want to have exposure to this space because you want to increase your purchasing power, I don't recommend anything other than Bitcoin, because that's the only thing I can feel confident that in 10 years, when she needs that money, it'll be there. And it'll probably be worth more dollars than it is today, because the government's going to print more dollars, but there's a limit to how many Bitcoin you can create.
Yeah. One of the things I find fascinating is the opacity of the supply of gold. Like, there's always these things like, is there any money? Is there any gold in Fort Knox?
Yeah.
We know how many were minted or how many will be minted, period, of Bitcoin. So there's that scarcity.
And the key component of that is that the supply changes are not linked to demand at all.
Right.
Every other thing in society, condos, gold, etc. When there's more demand, what do people do? Stocks, right? They go out and make more. So when there's high demand for stocks, companies go public. When there's high demand for gold, the miners dig into the ground and try to pull more out.
Right.
Bitcoin doesn't care about the demand. The demand happens,
it's there,
but the supply is fixed and algorithmic, and it happens via the protocol. I think there's something magical about that in a world where the rules sort of get changed arbitrarily based on politics. Pandemic happens, boom, we're going to print money. And oh, by the way, we're going to tell you we're going to give you $600, but the wealthy get PPP loans, $40 million, which preserves their equity and debt, which is worth hundreds of millions.
Right.
And so who got the real stimulus check in the pandemic? Those rules change based on politics and campaign contributions and things like that. You can't lobby Bitcoin. You can't give a campaign contribution to a politician and get them to change the supply schedule for Bitcoin.
What's your answer to, with gold or oil, you actually have a tangible asset that if the world goes to zero, you have something in your hand, where if there's a solar flare, maybe computers all identified and your crypto or digital currency is worth nothing?
I mean, my answer to that is if there's a solar flare that shuts down.
We're screwed anyway.
Yeah, like there's going to be riots and anarchy in the street within a week or two everywhere anyway.
That's the least of your problems.
Yeah. You're not going to be worried about your financial assets. You're going to be worried about the physical safety of yourself and your family, access to water. You're probably going to need weapons and to defend yourself. And so you're going way backwards in that idea. And so if you invest around that as a thesis, it's highly likely you're going to lose a lot of money over time anyway. Like the bears almost always lose money over time, essentially.
Yeah.
So I think you want to be an optimist. People who buy stocks for the long term tend to do better than people who constantly are shorting and hedging. And I think this idea that like the whole world is going to come to the end and your Bitcoin will be valueless is kind of a waste of the time conversation. If you're really worried about that, build a bunker underground, stash it with a year's worth of supply of water, put weapons in there and a generator and tons of fuel. Yeah. But outside of that, I think it's kind of a conversation that's better.
I think I heard Neil Dutta on something, and he was like, look, regardless of if I'm bullish or bearish in a moment, it was like, I have to be hopeful for the human race, in which case I have to be bullish.
Yeah.
Over time, I have to be bullish. I see the same thing here.
That's right. And I think Bitcoin is a fundamentally bullish bet. A lot of people say, oh, it's like a
doomer money or something. Yeah.
And it's really not.
No.
If you're optimistic about the future of the planet, you want to protect and preserve your purchasing value. You want to protect and preserve your energy, and you want to be able to take care of your family because you believe in the future. You believe the future is going to be better.
Well, and not to mention the business that you're like primarily concerned with, the mining industry, it's also preservation of the infrastructure, right? It goes hand in hand with the grid.
Yeah, I mean, the Bitcoin miners are making the grid more anti-fragile. It's a heavy-duty load, large-scale user of power that oftentimes is stranded or not able to transport into the load centers. They can curtail anytime. They're location agnostic, so they're often situated in communities that are underserved without a lot of investment, without a lot of interest. And now there is, because these miners are coming in and building new facilities and paying taxes and helping build up the schools and the infrastructure. And it's really incredible. And a lot of media, left-wing media narratives are going to be, hey, this thing uses a lot of power. And it's like, well, so do washing machines, right? So do pretty much everything that you use in your life uses more energy. That's a sign of human prosperity. And Bitcoin mining isn't different. But what's cool about Bitcoin mining is it can use the energy that no one else wants, and it can give power back to the grid when the demand for these other uses goes up a lot. There's really nothing else like it.
Yeah, there's like something like between 40 and 60% trapped unusable energy essentially in the grid.
Yeah, and there's like 20 to 30 gigawatts of stranded renewables just in the Panhandle in West Texas.
Yeah.
So I was out, was lucky enough to go for a little drive out through West Texas, and I got to visit a immersion Bitcoin facility. It was so much fun because the cows everywhere, oil rigs everywhere, and then this stranded gas like Bitcoin mine. And I was like, this is so much fun.
It's a real trip when you actually go out. I was out there earlier this week, and I was sitting at the bar, the hotel, and there was like guys talking about the oil rigs and the natural gas places. And then there's the Bitcoin mining people, like right next to each other. So one's like more of a tech first digital asset, like this thing that most people still don't understand. The other thing is like an old world infrastructure business that's been around in the US for 150 years.
And they do so similar a thing, right? You know?
They're ultimately, Bitcoin is energy.
Yeah.
And that's the key thing between proof of work and proof of stake. Bitcoin, to grow and to be sustainable and to be safe, needs energy. And it stores energy, and it's integrated with all of the energy assets that already exist in a sense.
Yeah.
And most of crypto isn't. That's the real, forget about what the toxic maxis say and Bitcoin just better and all that. There's real physicality to Bitcoin that you just don't have in Ethereum, especially not now as a transition to proof of stake.
Well, that was a wonderful interview. Thank you so very much, Mike. It's been a pleasure having you on. Look forward to having some additional conversations with you guys. Hopefully, I'm back on the merge one time.
Sounds good. Thank you guys.
That'll be great. All right. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for watching The Merge. We've got a ton more stuff for you to watch on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, everywhere. Check us out.